You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1. Welcome to Missed Apex Podcast. Today we're going to share some tech, insights, and F1 news with you. We'll ask which upgrades will work. How are Mercedes definitely cheating, probably? And what can Red Bull do to hang on? Quick Milton Keynes Silverstone weekend meetup update. It's good news. I promised you a link to properly sign up for our July 6th live event, but just as I was about to pull the trigger on the venue, we had a much better option come up, and I just haven't quite got it over the line. But it does mean there will be an extra motorsport activity that's optional that you can purchase in the lead up to the event as well, and I'm very excited about it. If you've already messaged me, you're in, and you'll get an email the second I know, you'll know. But if not, there is an easy sign-up form, missedapexpodcast.com/live show. You can just add your email in there, and then you'll also get live updates. But it's July 6th. It's in the evening, so it's a Saturday of Silverstone. It's 30 minutes from Silverstone. It's right off the main drag, the A5 in Milton Keynes. There's parking, there's everything you need there, and then there's Ubers to wherever you're staying. But on with the news, and we are still an independent podcast produced in the podcasting shed with the kind support of our patrons and partners. We aim to bring you a race review before your Monday morning commute. We might be wrong, but we're first. I'm joined in the shed by Matt Trumpets. Hello, Matt.
Hey, is the motorsport activity getting to set up a cart randomly and then see Brad try and drive it around a track? Because I would totally pay for that.
It's go-karting. I don't want to curse it, but yes, there's going to be some karting available at the Missed Apex event. I'm 90% there. Matt, tech special today, so we have got some non-tech F1 news, but this is the most critical time in the season that we could possibly have a tech update, because everybody is on the edge of their seat wondering, is the season about to turn on its head?
Yeah, I thought through it all, and I had a billion very specific questions for Summers. And then it occurred to me that the entirety of everything can be covered with 3 or 4 very simple questions, which I will introduce shortly.
All right. Well, you've spoiled now. I was going to do a big intro. You've spoiled that we are being joined by the one and only, the magnificent tech guru of F1 journalism from motorsport.com. It's Matthew Summers, F1 Summerfield. Hello, Summers.
Hey, mate. I don't think I can get my door through that. My head through that door.
We're just building you up to knock you down. That's what we do in British media. Tall poppy syndrome. We've got to feed you with fertilizer first and then chop you down. But hey, Summers, this has got to be for you one of the more interesting periods in Formula One in recent years, because it's why has everyone failed and why are Red Bull brilliant has suddenly become, well, wait a minute, can people actually make a dent here?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think there's always obviously periods of dominance in regulations, and so to suddenly see that gap has narrowed quite significantly is obviously very interesting, not only from a technical point of view, but also from a sporting aspect, because hopefully we will see some very close racing over the course of the rest of this season.
Yeah, well, this sort of gets me onto what I want to talk about. Like we're discussing already sort of the limitations and the teams because in every regulation set, and I know because I'm literally saying words you have given me, after a certain amount of time, there's convergence. The teams that got the early start find it harder and harder to make gains, but the teams catch up because they can see directions that they missed first off. And I wonder, this seems to be maybe compared to previous regulation set a bit early, but is it because there's a harder limit to what you can extract from this particular aerodynamic concept, sort of the ground effect concept?
I think there's that, but on top of that, we have to remember that we've got restrictions in place that we haven't necessarily had in Formula One's past in terms of the scale, that the teams have for wind tunnel usage, CFD usage, based on their championship position in the previous season that's reset every 6 months, and also obviously the cost cap. So those things do have some merit in terms of being able to equalise some of the performance levels. So I think it's difficult for teams that have perhaps run away with it at the start to then continue to find the extra performance that's required to overhaul the teams that are obviously coming at them. And I think that's why we're starting to see some convergence on the performance side of things.
Okay, well, because we are all ruled by recency bias, let's start then with, I think, everyone's big question after looking at the times in Canada, specifically the last laps and Mercedes lap times in general versus Red Bulls. It's hard to walk away from that, not thinking perhaps Mercedes threw away a potential win. And that's a massive step forward in performance. So important question number one, is this just an imaginary blip in the data, or have they actually found a direction, and are they headed somewhere with this? And I know we've only got one data point, so that's not really enough. So please give me all of your guesses now.
Okay, so I think that there's a few things at play here, and I think the biggest one to remember is that because, as you say, it is one data point, and if you think about Montreal and you think about the teams that were towards the front of that pack, how many of those teams were Mercedes-powered cars? How many of them were Honda-powered cars? And how many of the ones at the back were Ferrari-powered cars? Now, that has to play into how that, sort of finished up in terms of the overall race positions, but also from a qualifying point of view. The first thing that I noticed was the fact that Aston Martin was suddenly seeming quite quick compared to where they had been relatively over the course of the last few races. And so to me, it just speaks volumes to the fact that for whatever reason, that the Mercedes power unit was very efficient at that particular circuit, whether that be because of fuel consumption or whether it's just a nugget of information that works on that particular circuit for the Mercedes power unit. I do think that Mercedes have made a leap forward. We'll probably talk more about their upgrade packages that they've put on the car over the course of the last few races, but they certainly seem to have made a leap. I don't think it's as big as perhaps Montreal made it out to look. However, it does give you some hope that the pack has started to close.
Okay, and I just want to follow up because, correct me if I'm wrong. Well, I don't need to say that. You do that regardless. But you can't change a lot of aspects of the power unit itself, which is why we've heard Alpine complaining endlessly about being down on power. But one thing I think we learned from Red Bull that you can do is an awful lot of work to improve the cooling in your car. And I'm wondering, do you think that might be part of the key to their sudden leap forward?
Yeah, I mean, it is one factor, because if you think about the type of circuit as well, if all of those teams have suddenly embarked on finding a resolution to their cooling issues because of the power unit at this stage in the season. If you remember, we're now 8 races into the season, so anything that they were really struggling with in the pre-season test and through the first few races, this is the time in the season where you would really start to expect to see the teams deal with those issues. Now, if they were having those issues in those earlier stages, you should have resolved them by now, and that's where you might see that bear out, especially at a track like Montreal, where we're talking about efficiency side of things as well.
Okay, so let's get a little bit deeper into it. There's two big things to talk about here, and I think the biggest one actually happened in Monaco, which is they finally gave up on going their own way in a lot of ways with the front wing. They stopped being super cute with the top element of the front wing.
Stop being illegal, more like. Am I right?
Well,
that's what Red Bull said.
That's the other side of it. But first I want to talk about this front wing and how much of a departure it is compared to what they'd previously been trying to do, and how important you think it is.
I mean, yes, the thing that you have to think about with a front wing is it's really got a few things that it is doing in terms of performance. So it is obviously generating downforce, and that helps to balance the car front to rear. However, one of the most important aspects of the front wing is dealing with the first part of the airflow that travels over the car itself. And so it appears what Mercedes have done is switch concepts to something which is very similar to everybody else, more span-wise distribution on the flaps themselves.
Wait. Sorry, Summers. Can I be the useful idiot here? More span-wise flap diffusion?
Span-wise distribution. So
Right.
think about the flap, the front wing flaps.
Right.
And Mercedes had a very slender inboard flap. It was the thing that everybody picked up on their car at the start of the season, thinking it was illegal because it was so very different to anything that we thought was possible in these regulations. However, they've now switched to something that is more traditional and which you see on the rest of the cars. And so that's one of the reasons why you talk about the distribution, because they're switching from something which was more aero driven to something which is more downforce driven, and they're changing the ratio between the two.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to slow down the tech chat, but just on behalf of all the stupid people, they've changed it from a more aero direction to a more downforce direction. Does that mean, like, instead of trying to really be aerodynamically efficient, they're now going for pure downforce points? And if it's at the front, is that going to be Hamilton driven? Because he just wants that front end to dig in.
No, I don't think it's a Hamilton thing. I think it's just a performance thing overall in general to get the best from their car. And it's not completely a front wing that has revolutionised Mercedes, as you would probably have been led to believe by the rest of the media, because obviously as soon as that went on the car got quicker. Yeah. But this is the last part of the update, which has stretched out since Miami. So, it's, as we've talked about, me and Matt, in the past, it's not one thing that ever fixes a car. It's a number of things within the daisy chain, an aerodynamic handshake down the car. And so their biggest thing that they've made the changes to, and the thing that is the most sensitive on these cars, is the floor. And that has had several iterational changes since Miami.
Yeah, and I think we might even be getting another update in Barcelona, or at least that's been rumored. But what really struck me was we saw this new wing show up, and I think those of you even who don't pay a lot of attention or as much attention to these sorts of fine-tooth details will remember there was sort of Hamilton doesn't want the new front wing because he doesn't want to crash it and get a grid penalty if they don't have a replacement for it in Monaco. But what showed up that I think was maybe more important than a lot of people realize was the front suspension updates that came in Canada. So was that the final piece of the puzzle to see them suddenly potentially winning a race versus hanging out in 4th to 7th where they'd sort of been stuck for a while?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing to look at is the back trace between the updates. So if we look back between the races, this all started in Miami. So we had a floor update which included the floor edge wing. They also changed some of the structure of the front part of the floor. They then did another update to the floor in Imola, and they made further changes in Monaco when they changed the fences and all sorts of other paraphernalia around the front edge of the floor. So it's all to do with extracting more performance from the front end of the floor because of ride height sensitivity to improve performance at the rear and obviously into the diffuser area. Now, on top of that, at Monaco, we saw the front wing arrive that, as you mentioned, Hamilton didn't want to run because they only had a number of those available. And then in Canada, both drivers had it at their disposal, along with a change to the fairings on the front suspension. Now, the front suspension itself, from a mechanical point of view, wasn't any different than before. It was just the fairings that have been changed. And again, this is about changing the relationship between the changes that had been made with the front wing and the front end of the floor. And in between those are those suspension fairings. And so you have to make the changes in between to get the most performance from every aspect of that update. And that's why it's taken them several races to do so. And it's why we've suddenly seen them make a sizable leap forward, because obviously everything now is all speaking from the same song sheet rather than, the the drip feed of updates that have happened, but not quite got on top of the performance that they really wanted from them.
Okay, one of the biggest problems Mercedes has had is they've either been good one way or the other way, but not good enough in both ways. So this is just obviously, I guess, because I think we can agree that in Barcelona, this is a question that we will see answered on the track. But in your estimation, do you think they are now on a path to be able to have performance with both slow and fast characteristic turns that previously had been either one or the other?
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting caveat to that is the fact that they've changed rear wing philosophies. So we've seen them introduce a new rear wing in Imola. They had a version of that for Monaco, and it's all to do with the tip section of the rear wing, which we've seen a lot of development from different teams on during the course of this regulation set. But Mercedes have opted to go down a completely new path that nobody else has trod before. And I think that's probably where a lot of their gains have happened, because now they have what I would consider to be more of a split between high and low downforce arrangements. You've obviously got the high downforce for Monaco, running a very similar tip section, but using a high downforce rear wing arrangement. And then they've done similarly on the lower downforce side of things with the tip section, but had a low downforce wing. And also on top of that, an area where they've always been susceptible compared to the other teams is their use of the beam wing and how that interacts with the diffuser and the rear wing. And they seem to have got on top of that with some new designs appearing as well. So it's just a massive push from Mercedes. That's top and bottom of it. They have made a significant push on the development of this car, and that is what has effectively bullied their way to the front of the pack.
Okay, then there's only one more question to ask. Why are they cheating with flexible front wings now and not Red Bull?
Yeah.
Aren't we in a ironic stage right here? Because
Red Bull would never.
Red Bull have never had a flexible wing in their lifetime. Yeah, I mean, obviously, all of the teams are working on flexible wings. Anything that passes the tests that are instructed by the FIA in the static tests are fine. Obviously, the FIA have other ways of testing whilst they're out on the circuit now with the high-speed cameras, etc., that are mounted on the cars. So they will know if this is happening. But it's how they come up with a way to stop what's happening. Technical Directive 18 last year stymied a lot of the teams in this respect, but it appears that other teams have gotten on top of it and have found other ways around it. And it smacks very much of the first real flexi-wing saga that we had, front-wing flexi-wing saga, in as much as that there's no one way that it's been done. Some teams are flexing the entirety of the span, some are flexing the tips, some are flexing back to front. So everybody's doing it a little bit differently. And so to try to mitigate that with another technical directive or regulation change could be very difficult. And so my response to it would be just do better, because that's what Formula One's about, isn't it?
Fix your car, Red Bull. Fix your car.
Yeah, I do love it because it is impossible to avoid parts flexing. Aeroelasticity is a thing that cannot be argued with from a physics point of view, but the amount of it is highly subjective. And what you can get away with and what they decide they will let teams get away with is always ultimately political. And it's interesting to see. And maybe just the fact that they accused Ferrari and Mercedes and was it McLaren as well, maybe that explains why they're just being a little more casual about it these days.
It does feel like a sign that they might genuinely be a little bit nervous about the competition, that they would come out and start going, everybody else is cheating. And like there's something, under the surface at Red Bull, politically, internally, that feels a little bit unsettled, especially since, all of the things at the beginning of the season. And then Adrian Newey seems to have left as a direct result of the things. And Zach Brown takes every single opportunity, every time a mic is put in front of him to go, yep, things are going bad at Red Bull. They're going to lose more key personnel. Zach Brown starts talking about the prestigiousness and the high profile of the resumes that are ending up on his desk. And he's making a real big point of there's going to be this exodus from Red Bull. And then suddenly they're accusing everybody else of cheating. Whereas normally their attitude to this kind of thing is, hey, come on, laissez-faire, let it be. Rules, hey, they're there for flexing.
Yeah, but Ron Dennis was very good at this. He started a political side war, effectively, to get the FIA involved. And often the statement that you kind of come up with Formula One is, if you can't do it, get it banned instead. And that is the approach that they're basically taking.
Yeah.
If we can't figure it out quickly, we can't get it on our car quickly, then let's try to stymie the other teams. It's just whether the FIA will take, to trying to deal with it, because as we've already mentioned, it appears that there's several ways in which that this is actually occurring, and it's not just a one suit fits all kind of scenario. And
if you said earlier that maybe Montreal and Monaco might have been exacerbating this effect of the pack closing up, what would be a good test of this is true? So we've got Barcelona and Silverstone coming up. Both have a lot of high-speed corners, a lot of if you are going to be good at Barcelona and Silverstone, you've got a good race car. So is this the fairest double header? Oh no, we've got Austria as well, haven't we, as well? So is this the fairest indication after this triple header we'll know the order?
I think that is a good way of looking at it, because as we know, historically, F1 teams have tested in Barcelona, so they have a huge amount of data to work from in that respect. And so you obviously, they're going to know how to get the best from their cars at that particular circuit. They will still need to do some homework whilst they're there to extract that performance. Silverstone, obviously, another track that you really need a high efficient car for. And I mean, Red Bull Ring, it might be their track, but unfortunately, based on what we've been seeing from Red Bull as of late, they may be struggling from a curb riding situation, and so that might come into play again as well from Red Bull side of things. So I think we're in for a very interesting 3 races in the short term future.
So that makes sort of an interesting proposition then, because Red Bull, seemingly compliant everywhere, beating the socks off of everyone except for Singapore, suddenly looks like they can't even figure out how to set their own car up anymore. So is this purely a mechanical issue for them, do you think? Or is this fundamentally they've been forced into narrower and narrower windows, chasing performance, trying to stay ahead of where they perceive their nearest rivals to be?
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head there, because if you think back to where they struggled in the past, Singapore being one of them, it is in scenarios whereby they struggled to ride curbs. They were having that issue in the past. This is not new to this car. It is new to this, not even new to this generation of car. We've seen it on the RB18, the RB19, and now obviously the RB20. So obviously, I think it's something that they can't probably resolve quickly either. And they're having to find performance, as you say, from a narrower window of operation, because the other teams have caught up to them, and now suddenly, they don't have the advantage that they once had.
And just looking at it, there was an article on Formula Uno about the tie rod in particular. I don't know if you got a chance to look at that. Is it a thing that is solvable in terms of giving them sort of a response to this, a little wider window mechanically, and still being able to keep their aero platform as rigid as they'd like for the performance benefits of that?
I don't think it's something that's perhaps impeding them in the way that might be detrimental to them, if that were the case, because they're not the only one running a pull rod front suspension. Let's get that fact out there. You know, McLaren run pull rod front suspension, so that isn't the only reason. They're obviously different in terms of the way that they are set up. And interestingly, at the last race during FP1, Red Bull actually had some dots, some targets placed on the pull rod and the front brake fence in order that they could look at that from a high-speed camera that was mounted on the side of the nose. So they are looking at those things. There's clearly something going on there. I don't think it's something that they can remedy quickly if they do find out that that is what is causing them the issue. But this is Red Bull. They've found other ways to improve performance very quickly in their past. But as I say, that juts up against some of the other problems that they have in terms of the CFD wind tunnel restrictions and cost cap element, especially when you're crashing cars at a frequency. So,
Hey, Perez strays again.
Sorry, Spanners. I forgot you were a Perez apologiser.
Just every topic, just Perez catches strays for no reason.
Well, I don't know what to say to that. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. I don't think that it's going to be something they can solve quickly. And obviously, it has made it more difficult for them over the course of the last few races. It's not purely aerodynamical or mechanical. I don't think it's just something that is inherent in that car and that they will obviously have to just deal with on a ad hoc basis in the meantime.
Yeah, well, and this brings up sort of the interesting contra example of VCarb running their suspension and absolutely not only not having these problems, but I think they're bringing an update and they're looking like farther forward than we've seen them the last couple of years.
That's like comparing a Formula One car to an F2 car, though, isn't it, in terms of downforce levels? So I think that you're comparing apples and oranges if you're comparing those two teams to one another. Yes, you might have the same mechanical basis to your car, but if you've got 90 points of downforce less, then they're going to respond in very different ways. They're also going to do very different things to the tyres and the contact patch. And these things eat at those particular aspects from a mechanical point of view. Although, obviously, I'm not going to get into the weeds of that because Spanners might get a little bit angry.
No.
Oh, no, weed away. Can we please talk about spring rates and
I'm sure he would love that.
hysteresis and camber and what was my latest one I found is like setting up the toe steering where you set up so that when you steer it, the toe of the thing changes to give you better performance. There's so many interesting suspension tricks in the world. That's what I would say.
Yes.
Let's talk then a little bit about the team that looked like they could win Canada, but actually I think probably couldn't. And they're now striking me, I don't know if you have the same sense, that they're actually, they've fallen off the pace a little bit. And that would be McLaren. They look good in the wet, but in the dry, the times weren't there. And they're now putting on we're a little bit behind everybody else. Is that honestly the case? Or is this just protective coloration before they strike at Silverstone?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. I mean, another team, though, that have been excessively good this season at their update packages and finding performance from the base car and improving it over the course of the 8 races that we've had so far. They made a significant leap forward. And I think, again, we get caught up in the fact that some cars and teams are just better at some circuits than they are at others from a setup point of view, both aerodynamically and mechanically. And so whilst Mercedes perhaps looked excellent in Canada, that took the shine off of McLaren in that respect. But as you also mentioned, the difference between a wet and a dry track, and did they maybe put on a little bit more wing accounting for a wet track, not a drying track, and did they maybe set the car slightly differently for those circumstances? You know, that those are things that you have to think about as well, because we've obviously seen that in the past where, you know, teams have burnt out tyres trying to run something at one end of the spectrum and suddenly the track dries. So I think McLaren have done an exceptional job and they're not far away, but now they're sort of in that that pack that's in there chasing Red Bull, rather than right on the tail of Red Bull.
So, two interesting things. One is, in sort of preparing for today's show, I came across a quote from Stella that rather than bringing like a big update, as they sort of have been doing, they're moving to a bits and pieces kind of update. So they'll have some stuff they were working on that they're going to bring to Barcelona, but it won't be the same size upgrade as we're used to seeing from that. Is there a good reason for this sudden change in philosophy, or is this just sort of we think we're close, and if we push a few things, we'll be within reaching distance of the top of the field again?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to those big ticket items, doesn't it? I mean, the way to look at it, let's use Mercedes as the example, because they're the ones that have done this over the course of the last 4 races, or 3, 4, 5 races. So they've introduced or drip fed their parts through the system, and then it's culminated in them looking like absolute magicians when all of those parts are suddenly on the car and everything looks great. Now, McLaren historically have done the opposite of that and have bought big update packages, and you run a risk in that scenario of having those parts fail, that it doesn't provide the performance that you're looking for. McLaren have had the opposite happen with them, where they don't really understand as to how that performance has got onto the car. Yeah, why are we good? And the reason for that is correlation at the end of the day. The difference between the simulation world and the real world is often different. So McLaren have just stumbled upon a small segment of performance that allowed them to be better than they anticipated that their simulation tools were saying would be. So let's say the simulation tools were saying it was going to gain them half a second, but they've actually gained 0.6 of a second. And that is predominantly because the correlation is slightly off, but to their advantage. And I think that's kind of where McLaren are now going to introduce smaller components to the update packages, because they know that they've got the bulk performance out of those last updates, and now they're just looking to hone in on the additional performance that they can find from what they've already updated.
But when it comes to upgrades, McLaren have probably been the standout team of the last few seasons, where they go, hang on a minute, I know, let's just have a really bold package and just go for it. And then they surprise the field. And they're not following traditional update paths. It really feels like there's something different happening at McLaren, where they can turn up with something. And so far, when they've gone, let's be bold and go for it, it's really worked and come off. And this is what I'm saying, like, they might not have the overall best package. It might turn out that over the course of the season, they're the 3rd or 4th fastest car overall. However, take that aside, just take the raw performance aside. Operationally, when they deliver the updates, the way the updates hit reality and perform, and then operationally, pit stops, the driver performance, particularly with Lando, I'm just making the case that the personnel making decisions in McLaren, at every single point, McLaren are the best team in Formula One right now. Core baseline performance aside, they are just the most impressive group of people.
Yeah, they're working extremely efficiently. Is the way to look at it. I will also add, there's a reason why I don't call them upgrades. And that has come about with the argument between Toto and Christian Horner as of late. I always call them updates, because they're an updated version of a part rather than an upgrade. Because at the end of the day, you never know it's going to upgrade the car until it's on the car. And then it might be a downgrade, like Red Bull has supposedly had. So I think that's an important thing to mention, is the fact that until a part is on the car, you don't know what performance you're ultimately going to get from it in the real world. Yeah,
but every time McLaren have gone, we've got a new thing, it's worked.
Yeah, that there is a case for that. And as I say, I think it's partly because their correlation is low, i.e. they're lowballing what they think their potential is going to be, and suddenly once it does land on the car, it is giving them more performance than perhaps they anticipated it would. And at a certain point, those two worlds will meet, and that will stop happening, because they're then looking for the very small gains that are left over. And that is where McLaren probably are right now. They probably know that, and that's why they're going to start to drip feed smaller updates into their package over the course of the next few races.
Expectations management. One of the most interesting things I read, and the only thing we're not talking about here, is in speaking on this. I think it was Stella who mentioned that one of their guesses as to why they see this is not just that they have their tools lowballed what they were going to get, but that the manner in which these updates affected the car handling improved driver confidence. So that soft, squishy bit between the wheel and the engine does still sometimes matter. And this kind of strikes a theme with me because we're going to talk about Williams a little bit in terms of looking for a more benign performance, a more predictable performance, so the driver can get closer to extracting the full potential of the package.
Yeah, I mean, we've all driven karts here, and we know that when we get in a particular kart that seems to be better than another kart, whether that be placebo or not, you will find more performance, you will find more lap time, just purely because you feel more comfortable with it. And that obviously is, as you've mentioned, Stella is saying, is bearing out for McLaren because they're suddenly finding more performance from both the aerodynamic side of things, mechanical side, and then confidence from the driver being able to push things.
Okay, so now I'm going to have to bring it up. The secret shame of the Formula One grid: overweight cars. We had Alex Albon finally admitting the truth that his Williams was vastly overweight and that a lot of the performance enhancements that he felt were being hidden because the car itself, being overweight, costs lap time, like lots of lap time. I think it's, what is it, about 0.3 for every 10 kilograms, if my memory serves me correctly?
Yeah, and there was a
roughly speaking.
Subpoint to this story was Alex Albon apologizing to the press almost for saying, I wasn't allowed to talk about it. So whenever I wanted to talk about, I'm saying the car's feeling better, but then we're lining up 19th and 20th, I wasn't able to say to you, that's because the car's massively overweight. So for everybody who ever says, but the driver said such and such, Albon's just come up there and gone, yeah, do you know all those interviews I gave for 6 months, completely lying about the real reason why we were at the back of the grid? But the weight difference was something like, I can't remember the figure, but it's like 20 kilograms.
It was 14
kilograms. So that's fairly significant. So if you think about picking up a couple of 8-kilogram weights in your hands and throwing them up, but he was talking about that being half a second in lap time. It's amazing to think that a couple of 8-kilogram dumbbells, hang on, my maths is bad, don't email me, 7-kilogram dumbbells is enough to cost you half a second in an F1 car. If
I strap those to your arms and ask you to steer a steering wheel, how heavy would they feel then?
With these arms, have you seen these? I've got arms of Garth, mate. I'll be fine. So yeah, I'm sure it makes a difference, but it also feels like, isn't this really, really basic weight saving in Formula One? It seems almost inexcusable to turn up overweight.
Yeah, but we have to remember that Williams were off target in terms of getting their car ready for this season, which has been a trait of Williams over the course of the last few seasons, purely because of the budgetary restrictions, their processes, etc., of which they are trying to resolve. And I think James Vales is doing an exceptional job with what he's doing at Williams at the moment. But I'd also preface that with the fact that all of the teams start with a higher weighted car or chassis than they desire at the start of the season, and they try to lose weight throughout the course of the season because that is just how you find performance, and they know that. I mean, back in the day when you were changing bolts just to save grams, Formula One will always find ways to reduce weight. It is the enemy of this sport in many ways in terms of performance. And so to have 14 kilograms overweight of a chassis is exceptional. And now it just bears in mind the fact that they needed to rush that chassis through, let's say, because somebody had an accident in one as well.
Yeah, and
who
Connor,
had the accident in one.
Connor in our patron chat, very naughty. I heard they're considering getting rid of half their drivers to reduce weight. Yellow card. There might be a ban there. That is our live chat, though. Thank you, patrons. Patreon.com/Missed Apex if you want to join us in Discord.
Yeah, so the weight issue in Formula One is one that the sport will always be fighting, and certainly the teams are always fighting, because they just know that it's lost performance all the time, that they are overweight. Even when they get to the weight limit, they still want to reduce weight, because then that means that if they get to the weight limit then and below it, they can start moving the ballast around the car, and that is obviously going to give them better performance as well. So they will always chase that.
So I also want to talk about Williams, because in looking at the documents for the Montreal race, saw that they'd instituted a new rear pull rod that gave them a greater adjustability in terms of their ride height. And I just want to get your impression of exactly how important that could be for a team like Williams.
Well, interestingly, remember, they're the only Mercedes-powered team to now be running that old gearbox and rear suspension setup, because all of the other Mercedes-powered teams are running pushrod rear suspension, not pull rod. So there's obviously some gains to be made there, because it gives them more adjustability from circuit to circuit, and that is why they've obviously chased that down. And I would imagine it is partially to do with the loss in weight as well. It'd be interesting, I'm not sure, because I haven't checked back, whether both drivers ended up with that update or whether it was just on Albon's car.
Would it be really annoying for me to just ask for a quick primer on the difference between pull rod and push rod? Because Matt just says it all the time, and we have to kind of nod along and pretend we understand. Is there a quick way to explain
the other pulls?
Yeah, but it doesn't feel like how much would a fundamental difference does that make?
It's not just the mechanical aspect of what the system is doing; it's the weight position of the system as well. So, pull rod, you would have the weight at the base of the system. So, if it's at the rear of the car, it would be lower in the gearbox. Whereas push rod, you would have it at the top of the gearbox, and that's where the rockers and all of the suspension elements all sit. So it's not just to do with the mechanical aspect, it's also to do with things like centre of gravity and weight, where they're positioned in the car. So it's not something that you would change lightly. And that's, I think, why Williams didn't this season, because they knew that their car was already designed around a pull rod rear suspension, rather than the push rod that Mercedes have moved to this year.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that what you've said before, which is it's also their aerodynamic considerations, especially at the front of the car. Pull rod might be a little bit lighter. Flip side, it's generally a lot harder to adjust it than the push rod. So the previous compromise had always been push rod at the front, because it made for easier adjustments between free practice and before you went into Park Fermé. But now apparently the aerodynamic implications were enough that I think McLaren for sure and Red Bull for sure, and I don't remember who else is running it on the grid right now.
Pull rod front would probably be V-carb off the top of my head. Apart from that, everybody will be push rod.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. And to answer your other question, Spanners, that I did not forget, the last thing that I read said that Sargent was still running the heavier car.
That makes sense.
For a lot of different reasons. I think we could all agree. But I'm going to ask you, because we're talking about weight now, and because it has such a vast implication for performance and such a solvable one in terms of performance gains. Like, didn't we see it was Sauber who, having no development money at all, said, well, what if we just showed up with a car that was absolutely at the weight limit at the start of the season and just see how good we could do? And we were all very impressed. So we realized that was all we were going to see for them for 2.5 seasons. What other cars out there have started the season like that? I have some suspicions, but I'm curious if you have more than that.
Well, I can think of one team, one of your favourite teams, that would perhaps be considered to be a little bit overweight.
Previously one of my favorite teams?
Yes, I would say that now that a certain French driver is on the move. But But yeah, they certainly would be considered to be one of the overweight teams. They've been worse in the past because of the way that they had their power unit set up down the centre line of the car. They appear to have lost some weight, but I still think that they are probably over the weight limit, if not, on it, and certainly not really working with any ballast, I wouldn't have thought. In terms of the others, I would imagine that most of them are somewhere near the weight limit, if not well below it by now. Just because, as we've already mentioned, it's just performance that you're leaving on the table if you don't try to deal with that problem.
Okay, so I had wanted to reserve a little bit of time to talk about the future. But before we go, it's just a super quick round robin of the teams we haven't discussed. Is there anything that we should be aware of, in your opinion, or anything coming up that's worth mentioning?
Well, I think worth mentioning that's coming up even would be the Spanish Grand Prix and the update packages that we will see at that particular race.
Okay.
Because it is going to be one of those races, what you would call a line in the sand, a waypoint. It's another European race, so you don't have to ship parts around the world. So teams tend to bring bigger parts to those races where they can obviously just send them on in by truck or whatever. So we might see new floors. I know that we've got something coming from Ferrari in that respect. Mercedes have also mentioned that they're going to continue to make updates, should I say, to their floor. And I would suspect that teams like Aston Martin, who have found themselves falling a little bit shy of the pack, will also be looking to maybe bring a decently sized update package as well to that race. But I do think that we will see quite a substantial amount of updates on the horizon in Spain.
And that, again, a big part of that is because the track itself is such a good place to gather data on those. So teams prefer to have them there where it's a good place to get that information.
Yeah, because it's so well known to them, so they know that circuit inside out. They've got they've got a huge historical pool of data to work from, and so introducing large scale components at that race obviously is advantageous. Whereas they probably wouldn't go to somewhere like Austria, which I'm just looking at my war calendar to find out when the next sprint race is, and it is Austria, as I was thinking. You won't really want to update the car massively there, purely because it's a sprint race and it changes the format in which that you have time to be able to work on those components, because we only have one free practice session now for sprint. So those are the races where we'll see less. I suspect we'll get more at Spain and probably Silverstone, because obviously that is a high-speed circuit, and teams will probably bring a new medium downforce / low downforce rear wing arrangement for that circuit.
Now, you've been talking about in your ratings about the rear wingtip, and you mentioned it today. It's a pretty fascinating story, but you think we're going to see even more updates on that come Silverstone?
It's a possibility. I think what Red Bull have done with their wingtip is interesting in as much as that it's a small modification, which could allow teams to do very similar very quickly, because they'll be able to model it very quickly within their own simulation tools and drag out the performance that they've got quite quickly in terms of being able to change the end plate cutouts and gain downforce for less drag. So that is one very interesting dynamic that we've seen. But obviously on the other end of the spectrum, you've got an entirely new branch on the development tree from Mercedes in terms of what they've done, and I can't see anybody coming up with something similar to that for quite a substantial amount of time, just based on how different it is from what we've seen so far.
Okay, so my only question for you now is, do you want to jump right into the preview of the new regulations, or do you want to talk about the 25 tires first?
Oh, no, hang on. Whoa. We've skipped one of the top teams. We've skipped the team that's probably the most likely to win the championship apart from Red Bull. What's
Grazie, ragazzi.
Look, come on. We've got to talk about Lewis's car for next year and how well that development's going. But, okay, I feel like Ferrari haven't had the big spike, right? They haven't had that McLaren moment of like, whoa, but the drumbeat is they are getting better. They're getting operationally better. The upgrades are coming, but they haven't had that big early season upgrade that the other teams have had. So all the other teams have kind of gone, okay, here's the package for 2024. Get a few races in and go, oh no, we should have done X. And then they've brought that and had an improvement, unless you're Aston Martin. But it doesn't feel like Ferrari have had that big whoosh of here's our big Barcelona update, if you like.
Yeah, that's probably because it will be coming in Barcelona. I think they will have a big floor update at Barcelona.
But hang on, wait a minute. Matt's mocking me for that. But you know what I mean about Barcelona update. That has traditionally been the early season update. Yeah.
Yeah, but we have to remember as well, this is why it's frustrating from my side of things in how much the calendar has evolved, because Barcelona used to be the 5th race in the calendar. And now it's the, ninth? So everything has changed from a transport and logistics point of view. And so more of the front end of the calendar now are flyaways, which means you do have a problem with having big update packages arrive, because teams are less likely to want to put something on the car, fly halfway across the world for it to then fail and not produce the performance they're looking for. And that's why Spain, Barcelona, was always the track that everybody went to, because they knew it so well and they bought the big update package. And I think that's where we'll obviously see it from Ferrari this time round. But as you say, perhaps it's a little bit late in the trajectory of the developments because of that.
And it's that, and also just, referencing Williams and certainly Alpine at the beginning of the season, with the cost cap, production issues, and then with an unexpected early season crash, which I think has even maybe affected Red Bull a little bit. Your production time is limited, your production spend is limited, and at a certain point, you have to produce replacements so the car can actually drive the next race before you can finish developments that you had originally planned. So any big event like that potentially throws into disarray your neatly planned preseason schedule for when cool toys are going to show up for people to play with.
Or you could simply work out the difference between breaking the cost cap and getting a penalty for the following season.
Oh, wait. I thought we had memory hold this, but no, you Summers forgets nothing.
Yeah.
Unlike me.
That's an interesting topic, let's say. I think I would personally be thinking about breaking rules to make big gains.
Didn't the FIA say, yes, they broke the rules, but there's probably a tax thing that has had no follow-up and still, to me, doesn't seem like it's quite legit. But they did say, but if anyone else does it, Red Bull have basically used everyone's mulligan on this. And the next time... They said that. This
sounds like the fact that my front wing isn't flexing, but yours is. So, yeah, there seems like there's a very grey area in that topic.
I think multiple grey areas if you consult your local accountant.
Definitely.
But yeah, we actually had a discussion about whether or not to talk about Ferrari. And the thing is, they're an interesting team in terms of their performance. It's sort of, if you combine them with McLaren, they're like the 1-2 punch for Red Bull. One of the two of them is going to be close enough to cause Red Bull to potentially have some issues in the tracks we've seen so far. But what we haven't seen from them and what we want to talk about is where their technical development is going. And that's coming up very soon to a race weekend near you. Or nearer you than me, at least. Yeah.
I think the thing to think about is that no one team is going to develop at the same rate as another. And Ferrari used a lot of their development budget, let's call it, to get their car into the position to be challenging Red Bull at the start of the season. And then that means that you can't then spend another huge chunk of development budget in the next quarter of the season because you just don't have it at your disposal. And it comes down to what we've already talked about is the CFD and wind tunnel restrictions and also the cost cap and how they all butt up against one another in trying to keep the teams relatively close to one another now. If we were back in 2010 under a unrestricted cost cap and no limit on CFD and wind tunnel, or very little compared to what we have now, then I do think that you would have seen Ferrari pushing very, very, very hard at the start of this season, but they just don't have that capability under these new regulations.
Well, I mean, you know, that's if you're going to follow the regulations.
Yes.
Sorry, I couldn't resist one more slate dig there. Okay. And there's still the curious case of Aston just stuck out on their own. Sauber not doing much of anything despite having some new bits. But I felt it was probably a good time to sort of get your thoughts on the upcoming, maybe not really for 2026 after all, regulation set that has caused such a controversy. Because, you know, we've talked about it individually, sort of offline here, but we've not gotten your fully trenchant analysis of what's going on here.
Wait a minute.
So,
are you suggesting that me and Chris Stevens jumping on like an hour after the regulations got announced and just saying what we reckon isn't going to be sufficient? You need to bring in an F1 specialist tech journalist to clarify things.
Well,
I'm insulted,
I mean,
to be honest.
Considering I spent 35 minutes trying to explain how suspension and aerodynamics interacts in a way that affects the car, so he could understand a point I was trying to make. I just think getting someone who's an actual expert in the things and has such a deep knowledge of past regulation sets is probably worth, you know, hearing from.
Is there a question
fine.
in that?
Well, I was assuming Summers hadn't forgotten the 97-part question that I left for him before I responded to you. But yeah, the new regulation sets. The thing is, we've got streams crossing here. We have, on the one hand, the new power unit regulations, about which there's a massive fight. And then on the other hand, we have the incoming technical regulations, the aerodynamic regulations, so to speak, that we haven't seen at all, that everyone is also completely up in arms about, claiming that the combination of the two, and this is an Andrea Stella thing, that the cars will be incredibly fast in a straight line and unbelievably slow around the corners, and therefore they won't be good cars to race. And all of this, in my very personal opinion, and I want to use the word opinion here, is a result of letting the teams have way too much influence on the actual regulatory structure of the sport.
Yes. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, but for what I have seen of the 2026 regulations so far, obviously not the regulations, but the mooted version of them, I see that's a river behind you, not the sea, Matt, but I'd be throwing them in them. Not only
good. We're off to a good start. Continue.
Not only from a power unit point of view, which in my opinion we've gone in a very strange direction because it has been too focus led by the new teams the new manufacturers that are entering the sport and considering their feelings rather than having to think about what is the best for Formula One. And also on top of that, the regulations on the chassis and the aerodynamic side have had to be extremely led to the water by the fact that these power unit regulations are probably not really very good as well. So we've got two problems. We've got power unit regulations that aren't really going to provide anything from a racing point of view that is interesting. And we also have chassis and aerodynamic regulations that have to be a specific way in order to make those power unit regulations work.
Okay, I'm going to take my life into my own hands and argue with you slightly here. I know you say that the power unit regulations have been, dumbed down to invite new manufacturers to feel like they could be immediately competitive, which they won't be, but whatever.
Yeah,
we'll
but
worry
good.
about that later.
They've been way too complicated since 2014.
But to my understanding, one of the biggest problems with this power unit is that, especially on tracks that don't have lots of turns in them, it's going to be hard to regenerate enough energy for the battery to the point where you're going to be running the internal combustion engine as effectively a generator above a certain RPM level. And that the reason we have this problem is because the teams that are already in the sport are so worried about Audi having front axle regeneration knowledge they don't have, that they purposefully made sure that they couldn't use the braking on the front axle to help power that battery. Am I right or am I wrong?
You're right to some degree, but we've been here before with front axle generation technology interaction, being inserted into Formula One.
And good. I want to know. Tell me the history.
And what is all of that? What does that mean?
So KERS, think of KERS spanners having the option to be able to recover energy off the front axle in as much as the way that we used to with the crankshaft off the rear axle. And that was looked at for the 2014 regulations and was binned because it just simply wasn't viable for Formula One in many ways. Now, I'm not saying that it isn't viable now. I do think it was something that probably should have been looked at better, but we've got a set of regulations that everybody's agreed upon from a power unit manufacturer point of view. However, the regulations in the way that they've been framed has now forced the sport to have to make up a new set of aerodynamic criteria to be able to use those power units.
Active
and that
aero.
to me, that is fundamentally a massive problem in shaping regulations.
Okay, so if they hadn't have done the active aero, are we saying that the engines are, because they've had to make these compromises on the engine, if you didn't have the active aero, they'd be super draggy down the straight and you wouldn't have the power to overcome them. Therefore, we'd get very low lap times. And the lap time is like an ego thing. So just like pay drivers hiding the path from family money through companies to personal sponsors and then paying for their seat, F1 cannot not have the fastest lap times. So if you suddenly had a regulation set that had 5 seconds a lap slower, the ego, the pride, everything would kick in. People would kick off about that, and you couldn't have that. So I think this is Kyle's main argument, which is the active aero is only there to save the blushes of a difficult engine regulation that is a compromise.
Exactly. Yes.
Oh, okay. So Kyle's right. Oh, I don't want to live in that world.
Yeah, I mean, let's think about these regulations though. In many ways, they answer some of the problems that Formula One might have had in terms of the way in which that this new active aero will work, because it's what I've been arguing that DRS should have been since the get-go in terms of being able to how it deploys from a racing point of view, and having the power unit have its own sort of overtake mode. But I must say I do have major issues with how everything has been set up. However, from an historical point of view, in terms of regulations and the way that these regulations have been, let's say, the teams are not happy about what's going on, I foresee that these regulations will be delayed.
Right.
And we've had this in the past.
Yes.
2009. Okay, that regulation set was supposed to happen in 2008. 2014, that regulation set was supposed to happen in 2013. 2021 happened in 22.
Yep.
And I think that is what we will have happen here, because the teams just are simply going to rebut anything that the FIA send in their direction. Okay. Now, there's a cut-off time as well that has to be thought about here. And it's that there has to be 18 months prior to a regulation set being enacted for there to be an actual draft set of regulations on the table.
That's now.
Yeah, and the World Motorsport Council have to sign that off by the end of this month.
Right.
And if they do not, then this doesn't happen in 2026.
So, okay, but what are some of the best seasons in recent history? So obviously 2009 had a great story of a team jumping the gun with the double diffuser tech, and then that chase towards the end of the season. And of course 2021 delivered really close racing. I think if you polled the F1 community now, or even by the end of the year when the regulations are closing up, and say, do you want these regs now because the teams have closed up? Do you want them for another year? I think that is a landslide. That is going to be like 80-20. People will say delay the regulations. And I think maybe Liberty know that. I think maybe the FIA know that. And if you create a situation where, oh no, we've accidentally got to continue with another year of close racing before the next regulation set, I think that's a really happy accident. Let's just let that happen. And when it does happen, let's not berate F1 or FIA. Let's go, oh, what a shame. Okay, let's carry on.
I totally agree. I mean, there's so many pitfalls to what could potentially happen in 26, in as much as that there was a lot of people very angry in 2014 when the new power unit came along and the cars were simply too slow. And then we got the very quick knee-jerk reaction
the 2017
in 2017 regulations to try to rectify those issues that they believed had been caused by the 2014 regulations. And I feel that we might be in very similar land here. And that might be why I think we will end up with a pushback on the deliverance of these regs.
I think Reddit had a big effect on that. I think Reddit moved the needle on the 2017 regulations because of the pushback against the slower lap times. And it's very it's temporarily quite close to GP2. And I honestly, like, that was such a powerful platform at the time that whipped up this is ridiculous. It's meant to be the pinnacle of motorsport. And then we have the 20...
one weekend, one racetrack, and they were close to, for reasons that weren't even related to the regulations, as I recall it.
Yeah, and then you had 2017, which set us down this path that we've had for ages, where we've had nearly a decade of complaining about too much aero, the cars can't follow, because of that knee-jerk reaction. So I think that was the internet having a massive effect on the sport.
I'd also add that there's been a certain person from FOM going out and suggesting that the regulations will also be changed in 2030.
Yes.
Now, if that isn't an admission that you've got something severely wrong with your 2026 regulations just 4 years on from them, I think...
Yeah, Summers, I made that exact same point with Chris Stevens on our reaction show, which means that you didn't listen to our reaction show or you copy me. So I'm either offended or deeply flattered. But yeah, it's like, basically, I think we did a 2026 regs dead on arrival episode, didn't we? Because if you've already admitted you've gone the wrong way with the engines and they're going to change in 4 years, that really, that all we're talking about now could be, mute, because if those regs don't come in until 2027, and then you've got these new regulations slated for 2030, that's a mess. So we're going to have 3 years of a dirty compromise. Matt is shaking his head.
Think about how long the current power unit will have been in place. 12 years if we stick to 26.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you're changing for 4 years for the next set. Something doesn't speak right there.
Or 3. None of this makes sense to me. Because just looking at it, since I've been paying attention, you get your best results if you offset your power units versus your aerodynamic regulations. So say you have a 20-year regulatory cycle. After 10 years, you change the power unit regulations. And then the next 10 years, you change the aerodynamic regulations. Or maybe it's 8, or maybe it's 7. I think if you sat down and looked at it, Summers has a suggestion here. He thinks I'm onto something.
No, I'm just going to say that you're exactly right, that there should be an offset. However, you can't have...
Did you get that, Spanners?
You can't have an offset in this scenario, because if you put this power unit into the current regulation cars, you will have a car that is extremely slow and doesn't perform in the way that it needs to. And on top of that, I firmly believe that we've kind of got to the agreement that ground effect cars, if you want to call them that, because they're not really ground effect cars, but everybody wants to call them that. These ground effect regulation cars have been a failure too, because this new set of cars aren't using
They
aren't using that style of regulatory setup. They are based around a regulation set from previous to this.
But I think that's kind of brave. If you go, okay, we took the ground effect gamble. We made maybe compromises, like you say, maybe not full ground effect, but we're looking at it. And not only has it not achieved what we want it to achieve, but we don't see a way to then change it and develop it. We're going to go away from it. I would argue that shows decent project management and leadership to at least not keep doubling down to go, no, that didn't work. We're just going another way.
Yeah, no, they've acknowledged the fact that essentially that they've got it wrong, and the fact that these cars are very susceptible to ride height problems. And because we've changed so much in a very short space of time, i.e., the reduction in tools that they have for suspension, that has also compounded the problem with ride height, and obviously that meant we had porpoising to start with as well. Means that you have to kind of go a little bit backwards. And I think that's another reason why we might be having some pushback from some of the teams, because some of the teams believe they are firmly on top of these type of regulations, and they don't want to give up that advantage.
I know, but I want to push back a little bit on admitting they were wrong. I think there's a difference between making a wrong decision and ending up to be wrong. So I think they're wrong for the right reasons. I think everybody supported ground effect because we were trying to get rid of the... Did you not support it? Oh, you were on the right side of history. Well, we did. I think we did. I think we're like, yeah. The argument was if there's more downforce from ground effect and less aero wash, the cars can follow more. But that didn't happen
and that
at all.
turned out to be absolutely true, but it didn't wind up closing up the field spread, which was the larger problem.
No, but I think they were wrong for the right reasons. I don't, just because it ended up being wrong, that's not the same as doing the wrong thing, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry, Matt. I'm done.
No, I just... The issue here for me, we can delay regulations, and frankly, I think these regulations, it's how many years are we into them? 2. Go back and look at the racing in 2016 versus 2018 or 2019. I mean, number one, you got to give it more time to see what the final effect is, I think.
That was 3 regulation changes that you've just talked about, though, in that period. 2016 was a different car to 2017 and 2019.
Yeah, but I think you yourself have made the point. The longer the regulations are stable, the closer the racing will be. And I think we're already starting to see that. And I think we're seeing the cost cap actually perhaps accelerate that to an extent that probably none of us really thought that it would, if I'm being honest. But then you also come to the issue of, well, we went to all this fuss and all this trouble for one new manufacturer to buy an existing team, not even come in with a new team. If you delay them, what does that do to their investment, to their willingness to be in the sport? Oh, so the engine that I've just spent almost $1 billion on isn't going to be in the car. And the design that is going to be the design that I put the Audi name on, because obviously that's who I'm talking about, is going to be just another recycled Kick Sauber Alfa Romeo project from 5 years ago. Well, why am I spending all this money on this sport? I mean, I think there is an issue now. They've made all of this adaption to get Audi into the sport. If it doesn't happen on time, and Audi say, okay, well, yeah, maybe we'll just sell the team to whoever wants it. Then what do you do?
Yeah, and you are also forgetting there's another power unit manufacturer involved as well in Ford. Although obviously it is a Ford Red Bull project. And there's also the fact that Honda is still there, sat in the background, potentially as well as a manufacturer under that new regulation set as well. So, like you say, I think the one problem that you've got is that you are going to extremely annoy potential entrants to the sport, but it wouldn't be the first time that's happened, and it certainly won't be the last.
Fair enough. So I'm just going to ask you before we go, because I do want to talk about the tires being an issue. I want to talk about the fact that weight. I mean, I love Max's suggestion. They should just shave 100 or 150 kilograms off the current cars for the next regulation set. I would love to see that.
Yeah.
As long as length and width were also proportional to the savings. So they were smaller, shorter, and a lot lighter. But realistically, what's the best outcome here with active aerodynamics and these new power units? If it works out as best as could be hoped for, how would you see them looking when they write the actual rules? Because they've not been written down on paper where I can read them yet.
No, and that won't happen until the World Motorsport Council sign them off. And even then, it will only be a draft. I remember a set of draft regulations for what Max Mosley proposed between the two split regulations that never happened as well. So there's another story, isn't there? At the end of the day, I think we will obviously end up with something that is close to what we've seen, but obviously the teams will take those regulations whenever they're produced and rip them apart anyway and find different ways to make them work for them themselves. But on top of that, the car that was rendered for FOM is an old version of what is being talked about anyway. And I believe that there's about 4 different iterations from there onwards. And we saw some of those in separate parts of that release from the FIA. So there's a lot going on in terms of trying to understand how to deal with wake from the front wing and how they operate the floor and all sorts of other things. So what we've seen isn't hugely representative of the car itself. They're just trying to frame in our minds potentially what they will look like, and also introduce this active aero side of things so that people can understand how it's going to work, even though they made a bad job of doing that as well, from what I can read between the lines on social media, because nobody seems to understand how that actually works, even though it is quite a simplistic approach that they seem to have taken.
All right there, Mr. Summerfield. Now, you've given a good testimony here, but I'm just a simple country chicken. Now, you have dismissed the 2017 regulations as being a knee-jerk reaction. You have dismissed the 22 regulations for failed ground effect that you yourself would not have enacted. And you do not like these new regulations. So I'm going to put you on the spot, Mr. Summerfield. What regulations would you give for 2030?
I would reduce the amount of hybridization that we've got on the power unit, to reduce the amount of weight that we've got on the cars, and also reduce the weight in general. It's a massive problem. If you look back historically at the weight of the car compared to now, it's just ballooned massively over the past 10 to 15 years. You know, we're talking 200 kilograms or thereabouts. So weight is an issue. I would probably go with something like a V8 or a V6 turbo without much of a hybridization system. Maybe go back to some kind of KERS.
Get rid of hybrid.
Some low key version of KERS like we had with the V8s for push to pass. And then that then allows you to rethink overtaking aids, i.e. movable aero or DRS. But from a sporting aspect, use it differently, because I hate the way DRS works right now, and I have for a very long time.
Yeah, but DRS is gone. It's over. It's a thing of the past.
Not yet, it isn't. But it will be.
Now, Matt, I think you had one more thing.
Well, I had, it was the weight thing, but for me, it's the tire thing. Because I was looking at Pirelli talking about the 2025 tires that they have to develop, but also the tires for this new regulation set, where they're going to be somewhat narrower and slightly less in diameter, but they're not going to change the wheel size. And I just want to ask you if I'm correct in being concerned that that essentially means we're going to have even shorter sidewalls than we currently have. And if we have shorter sidewalls, isn't that going to make the problem of failure even more of an issue in terms of how fast the cars are going, unless the cars are going way less fast around the turns?
Well, we've already figured that out, that they won't have as much downforce as they've got now, and they'll be slower anyway. So we probably won't be putting as much force through the tyres that we're talking about. But yeah, it is problematic in as much as that they're reducing those sizes. But it is for a good reason, because they're trying to reduce speeds. And obviously there's a certain somebody here who always talks about something to do with tyres in terms of having grooved tyres.
Yeah, grooved tyres for the win. Like, why am I'm not wrong.
You're wrong.
Not wrong. Reduce grip.
You're wrong.
Take away the grip.
No, you're wrong. But I know you talk about it, so I thought I'd bring it up.
The thing is, if you're wrong about grooved tyres...
give you some hope.
If you're wrong about grooved tyres, what else are you wrong about? Like, people shouldn't be reading any of your articles. They're trash.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Have I thrown you?
You're throwing me under the bus.
You triggered me. So I will yield on groove tires for the sake of content, Matt.
Well, yeah, because it just gets to be a thing. As you remember, not too long ago, we were guests of a team at a different kind of racing series, and we talked about tires with the drivers. And they referenced how much the smaller sidewalls, the shorter sidewalls, affected the handling of their cars. I think we saw it clearly in Formula One when they went to the 18-inch wheels. And they've been discussing 16-inch wheels, which I thought, okay, well, maybe that's good because it gives you more sidewall to play with and more benign handling characteristics for the drivers. But Pirelli have said that that it will lead to too much overheating in their initial tests. And also, just to bring it up, we're going to be stuck with mule cars again, aren't we?
Yes, and if we're going to say about what would Summers change, well, let's just go back to 13-inch wheel rims then and big tyres. Because we didn't have a problem with that for decades. Yet we come along and thinking that we're going to be road relevant with 18-inch wheels. What or why? Have you ever seen a Formula One car on the road? And most modern cars now seem to be well over 18-inch wheels anyway. So
yeah, especially
it's a bit of a moot topic for me.
F1 donks.
Okay, so that was a big eye-opener going to the States for the first time in 15 years and seeing the size of the vehicles. If you want to be road relevant and it's an American sport, make F1 cars basically built like buses, big, shiny buses.
Kind of have already done that.
Yeah, well, yeah, there you go. That's what it's about. But if I could do the regs, then the first thing I would tear up is road relevance. I would say, let's grow up. Nobody is buying that you are leaders in the technology for road cars, okay? Yes, there's this big thing of like, oh, Williams developed the flywheel that stops buses from rolling backwards on hills. Yeah, of course, some engineering from F1 may filter to roads, but essentially you would not do any engineering project for roads in the way that Formula One develops, where you just rip up the rules every time and then you have to come up with a quick solution competing with everyone. That's fun for sport, but let's not pretend that you're supposed to be an industry leader. Everything they've done for road relevance has made the sport worse. So let's be grown up and let's just go, it's about the brand Mercedes coming into a sports car field and saying, look, we make a fast car and it's sexy and popular. Now buy our completely road relevant hybrid EV Mercedes, which is also cool by association. And people will do that. Stop trying to say, you know, we need to make our cars some dirty compromise as if we're going to be racing these cars on the M25. You're not. Let's just make sports cars because it's a motorsport. Is that so mad?
I see I triggered Spanish into a rant.
Sorry, I thought this was going to be your rant, but
oh, sorry. But it's madness. And there's not one road relevant thing that has been good for F1 as a sport.
I kind of agree, to be honest, Spanners. I mean, there has been crossover in Formula One's past and technologies that have found their way to road car technology. However, I think it's a bit of a long stretch in many ways to suggest that, you know, they were the leaders.
Pioneer, yeah.
It's the cart before the horse. They focused on building fast cars and then found things that they could use, not the other way round. Also, Le Mans, no tire blankets. That's all I'm going to say.
There's an argument, isn't there?
Oh, a big one.
All right.
Yes.
Well, I think that my rant has ruined the tech show. Sorry, but I hoped my presence here would simply be a voice representing the thick people that can't normally understand what you two are talking about. And I served that purpose until the rants at the end.
Well, you only replaced my rants because Matt knew how far I was going to go off the cliff if things got bad. So,
and I've seen the cliffs in your neighborhood too.
Yes.
Now, Summers, you do some non-F1 content. You're always sharing your golf stuff. Firstly, what's your handicap down to?
9.
Oh, my goodness. So we can basically never play together again. So,
but that's what handicap's for.
No, but it would be so frustrating now to just watch me, you know, hooking everything constantly and looking for it in the trees while you're there, you know, doing your 9 handicap stuff.
Yeah, I play bad occasionally, so, you know, I could come down to your level, let's say,
Okay.
but
In that case,
I play with all sorts of players all the time. That's what the handicap system's for.
Fair enough. I'll only play you after 4 points. But where can people catch up with like some of your non-F1 content?
So obviously I post on Twitter anyway, but if you wanted to watch some of my golf content, good luck to you. I've just posted the latest video where I try to break 75 at my home course.
Oh, wow.
And Summers Golf.
And
That's
of course,
where you find it on YouTube.
And of course, follow Summers at Summers F1 for all your tech news. Like Summers, I guarantee you, in 5 years' time, there will be no doubt that Matthew Summerfield is the number one tech journalist and the number one trusted source of F1 tech. You are a legend in this field, and you don't know it, you don't shout about it, so we're going to shout about it for you. Summers, thank you so much for your time.
No problem. Thanks for having me on as usual.
And Matt, you can follow Matt, I suppose, at MattPT55. You should follow me, because I am the best one, even on a tech show, at Spanners Ready. And you should consider supporting us on Patreon, patreon.com/missedapex. Now, we did the link earlier, which is missedapexpodcast.com/live event. Matt, is that the link? Oh, moment of
I will
madness.
go look right now and double check.
Live show. So missedapexpodcast.com/live show. And there's a form there where you can just put your email address in, and I will tell you the second that we confirm this venue, which I'm very excited to share with you. July 6th in Milton Keynes. And yes, there will be optional karting. So I'm going to say it will be optional in the lead up to the event. And we will be able to then do a live panel with a quiz. Catman has already written us a live quiz, and we'll probably do some kind of Q&A or a Milton Keynes Fixes F1 show. It will be fun, and we'll publish that later in the week. And and I think that will just be a great opportunity to meet up with our UK listeners.
It sounds like loads of fun. And I just want to say, if you're in the New York City area, June 18th, 28th, come see me at Lincoln Center. I'll be playing with the New York City Ska Orchestra.
Okay, that's great. Oh, and one last thing. If you like the Joe Saywood live audiences, we haven't done one for a while, but if you go to missedapexpodcast.com/Joe, then on July the 1st, we'll be having a 8 p.m. 2-hour private Zoom call where the content of that Zoom call is dictated by you, and you can sit and you can ask Joe Saywood questions. It's always a good hangout. Everyone, there seems to give us really good feedback. Jump on the Zoom call, open a beer, and just sit back and relax and get Joe's somewhat unguarded view. And if you think he's unguarded on the podcast, he's very unguarded on the live virtual audiences as well. We will see you midweek. Tuesday, we have a magazine show with an absolutely fantastic interview and some great segments. We'll hope we'll see you there. Until we see you next, work hard, be kind, and have fun. This was Missed Apex Podcast. I'm just a simple country chicken.